So the most important part of arboriculture, I'm going to say it's workforce strategy. So the people that make it up. Now, not in an airy-fairy, like I love people kind of way, but as in the product we sell is the labour of the people that work in the industry. Now, I've been in this industry close to 20 years now. I founded a company, grew it, and ultimately abandoned it because I couldn't find enough staff. Following that, I went back to university and I studied the skill shortage that we have across the world in arboriculture. Later, I returned to that same company and started putting all this research into action. And that's what I've been working on for the last few years. So workforce strategy is my bread and butter. I truly do believe it is the most important thing you can focus on in ARB. So I can already see a few heads shaking. People say, no, the most important part of arboriculture is of course the trees. Now you can make a very good argument for that. Of course, without the trees, we would be nothing. There would be nothing for the labour to do. But try doing ARB with just trees helping you out. Now, trees are great. I mean, they're filtering the air, they're standing there looking beautiful, but they don't do an awful lot of work. If you want to do the work, and it's the work that you get paid for, you're gonna need staff. And if you're gonna run staff, you're gonna need a strategy. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but finding skilled staff willing to do arboriculture for a weekly paycheck is extremely difficult. You need a way of organising them, a way of organising systems to make their jobs something that they would want to do. You need a strategy. So this is your workforce strategy. Now, it's not just that arborists are difficult to find. That's certainly a factor. But more importantly, your entire business depends on you being able to find them. Not just being able to find an arborist, but trying to find the right arborists who are able to do the work to the standard that you need. So if you can't quite find the people you want and you've got them in leadership positions or things like that, your service quality is going to decline. You're going to get a bad reputation as a company. You're probably going to have more accidents. You're probably going to make less money. You're going to get less done. So you're going to get less work done at a lower standard and basically have more problems. Now, workforce strategy addresses all of this, and that's why it's so important. So we can break workforce strategy into three core components. First is your supply, next is your training and deployment, and third is your retention. Now, each of these are important on their own, but they're also interrelated. So let's start with supply. Now, when you mention a skill shortage and how do we do something about it, the first thing that everyone comes up with is, supply. Look, we need to rectify supply. We need to entice more people into the industry, recruit harder, put more ads up, get more people through the door. Now, logically, this sounds like a good strategy, but it doesn't actually work. And we've seen this in arboriculture. Over the last 30 years, there's been a massive focus on supply. And it's not like we're overrun with arborists, especially ones willing to work at a company for a salary or a wage. Now, this is because the employment offer or the employee value, what they get in return for doing the job, it needs to be attractive. So it's not enough to increase supply and get them into the company or into the industry. Once they're in there, they need to stay there. Like, it's no good if you've got a shortage of workers and you bring someone into the industry and then they train for a little while and then go and start a company that needs 5 more workers. You get what I'm saying? You haven't actually solved a staffing problem. You've times it by 5. Remember, yes, there's an additional person, but they've created a need for 5 more people. So the supply aspect is an interesting part of this. Next up, we've got training and deployment. Now, funnily enough, this is probably high on the list of things people come up with when you say, oh, look, we've got a skill shortage, how are we going to sort this out? It's a natural suggestion that people just say, oh, yes, training, making arborists, very logical. We'll start making our own, and this will solve this problem. And in a way, yes, it would. But there's a pitfall here, and that is the cost needs to be kept under control. Now, only a certain portion of the training can be done in a classroom, regardless of how well you train them through books and theory and simulations, practice climbs and things. They're really going to need a significant amount of time on real job sites. And this ends up being at the cost of employers. So that cost cannot be too high. If it's too high, nobody is going to want to do it. So although you'll be bringing a whole lot of trainees in, and maybe you'll train them on chainsaw courses or something that can be trained easily, but to get them from that point of being a kind of entry-level person that needs a lot of supervision up to that point where they're working autonomously and they're actually useful, there's a big gap and someone needs to fill it. So there's sort of 3 scenarios of how that can be. Now, either having the apprentice there working is profitable, so you're able to organise them in such a way the cost of them is less than the value that they bring in. Another scenario, not quite as good, might be that you're training them and okay, it costs you a little bit, but assuming they stay on, once they are trained, you make all that money back and then some. Very reasonable. You get a lot of people taking on apprentices, even if that's the case. And then worst of all, which you got a real problem if this is the sort of financial situation, is that you train them, it's very expensive training them, and then even if they stay on, it's unlikely that you're ever going to recoup the money because the training was so expensive. If the industry ends up like that, you really have got some major problems with the training, and no amount of twisting people's arms is going to sort that out. You need to reduce the cost. Now, no matter what the cost is, whether it's at this kind of like already profitable level or kind of in the middle or at the end, the lower you make this cost, the more trainees you are able to have, the more each individual company will want to have and be willing to take on. And at the end of the day, the more arborists you're going to have in the industry, or the more arborists you're going to have employed at your company. So this brings me to the final component of your workforce strategy, which is your retention. So retention is critically important because without it, there's a whole lot of stuff that no longer works, both to do with training and to do with supply. So we just talked about the training. One scenario might be that you only recoup the cost of the training if the trainee stays on. In other words, if you have a reliable retention rate. So you confidently believe that they're going to stay on long enough to repay the training costs, essentially. And the same with supply. Like, you might have to make certain concessions. Maybe you're buying them $500 chainsaw trousers or something like that. Not a huge cost in the scheme of things. Unless you've got a terrible retention rate and you're buying these for guys that are only around for 6 months. Then it's starting to get expensive. So just little things like that. So retention really is the difference. But retention also is a significant cost if you don't have it. Like retraining people, the disruption it makes to crews that have been working together. If one person leaves, it gives someone else the idea of leaving, and it's a sort of slippery slope compounding problem that just creates problems through the whole company. So retention is the third and final aspect of your workforce strategy, critically important. So those are the key components of your strategy: your supply, your training, and your retention. It needs to encompass all of them. You need a bit of a plan of how you're going to handle each aspect. Now, certain parts of it are going to be more important than others for particular companies. Like maybe your main problem is that people are leaving, and then that's causing a problem with supply, and then you don't have enough people to supervise the training. So they're interrelated, but each of them needs to be looked at. And it can be a bit of work to figure out sort of what's the main constraint, like what is the first thing that you need to look at that's going to sort of start solving the other things. Like if we go back to the retention example, like if we could keep the guys there a little bit longer, well, maybe we wouldn't need to recruit so many. We could also train a few more because we'd have these more experienced guys there, and then that would help supply as well because some of these trainees would turn into arborists themselves. But it starts with making a plan. It starts with just acknowledging that each of these things are things we need to think about, and then thinking about them properly. And of course, as I said at the start, this is critically important for the business. This is the way that the business makes money. It completely depends on the quality and quantity of arborists it is able to attract, retain, and deploy. So you get that right, everything else will follow. I hope that's been useful. As always, like and subscribe. And if you've got anything you'd like me to do a video on, chuck it in the comments.